Friday night, we had the opportunity to go to DeSoto and watch Blooming Grove play a little football. And it was one of the most exciting games I got to go to. And I got to tell just a little bit about the game because if you read the write-up or if you were there, you know how exciting the game was. And there at the end, when it was tied up 35-35 and they were moving down the field rather slowly, and they got to that point where there were 14 seconds left and it was time to make a decision. And they let Tyler Ellison, is that his name, is that right? Kick the field goal, 48 yards. Amazing to sit there and watch it sail through the uprights. And in that moment, in just that moment, you're thinking how spectacular it was to, not just for the victory, but just in a clutch moment like that for that young man to do that. But, so many things could have gone wrong. Dalton could have flubbed the snap. Brody could have flubbed the catch in the hole. A lot of things could have happened in that moment, right? If he had just pulled it a little bit to the left or a little bit to the right, that second's gone. And then yesterday, I had this opportunity to go. I can't even tell this story, so. I'll give it just a second. I didn't think it was going to affect me this much. Life is made of moments, of seconds that change the outcome of life, that constantly remind us how precious life is. In a given year, there will be 31,557,600 seconds. Each one of us is going to be judged by how we use those little moments in life. And the question that I put before us is one that we sing oftentimes in that song, Swiftly We're Turning Life's Daily Pages. Swiftly the hours are changing to years. Those moments in life that we let slip by and we don't grab hold of and use to the fullest and deepest that we possibly can. To see the greatness of life, to share a smile, to steal a kiss, to make someone laugh. To be reminded of how great humanity can be, because in each one of us is a bit of the divine, the goodness of God as He has taught us and instructed us and led us through life. And we recognize that in those moments, in those few precious seconds that life hinges on, that everything can change, we continue to ask ourselves, how am I using that moment and that time? I'm reminded in Luke chapter 4 and verse 5 when the devil came and he was tempting Jesus. Matthew doesn't record these words for us. He simply says that the devil took him to a high mountain and he showed him all the kingdoms of the earth. But Luke emphasizes that it was in a moment, in just a second, in a fleeting vision, the devil gave Jesus a glimpse of what he could have had, and that was the temptation that Jesus faced in that moment. And imagine if he had taken the wrong path, if he had made the wrong choice in that instant, how our lives would be so drastically changed. Paul writes in 1 Corinthians 15 and verse 52 that in a moment, in the twinkling of an eye, we shall be changed. This corruptible shall put on incorruptibility. The mortal shall put on immortality. In a moment, in a second, all things can change. I like what he asks in Hebrews chapter 10. Verse 32 and following, when he says, I want you to go back to that time, to that moment of your conversion. To that time that you made the decision, I am going to follow God. that I am putting away sin, I am putting away the old life, I'm going to crucify the old man, and I'm going to take this new life of righteousness which God has created for me, and I'm going to be recreated in the image of Christ, Ephesians 2 and verse 10. In the moment in time, the world changes. And in a moment in our life, in a second, our soul hangs in the balances. And each year we will have those 31 million plus seconds. Each time we will have an opportunity to make a decision. What will I do with this one? How will you be using God's golden moments? May I suggest a few things? First of all, I would say that in those seconds that you have before you, whether there's the prospect of there being many seconds, or the prospect of that time being shortened ahead of us, may we, number one, rely upon God for everything that we need and everything that we do in these moments. We are assured in Galatians chapter 4 and verse 4 that when the fullness of time came, God sent His Son into the world. Jesus came when? In the fullness of time. Paul would write in Romans chapter 5 that it was in due season Christ died for the ungodly. God has mapped out a timeline. And in due season, or in the fullness of time, when we approach every day and every second, realizing we are nearing God's appointed time. We're told in Acts chapter 17 that God has appointed a day. God already knows when that judgment will be. And each day we are drawing closer and closer and closer to that moment. What are we doing in the time in between? How are we using these moments? Let us rely on God, first of all, by trusting in His timetable. Too often we get a little impatient, a little antsy. God, let's bring it on. God, let's take care of this. Let's do this now. Isn't it getting past time? And if God could speak to us, or if God were speaking directly to us, He might say, slow down, Sam. Or He might say, speed it up a bit, Sam. Because I have a timetable for you. We may not get everything on the day that we think that it is appropriate, but I can assure you this, God gives us everything we need in due season. I trust that. While I'm using God's golden moments, let me rely on God and trust in His timing. Let me trust in His wisdom. Because sometimes the very things that we ask for in prayer, or the things that we're seeking for in this life, are the things that will do us the most spiritual damage. Now, sometimes we're asking for maybe financial security, or we're wondering about this, or we're wondering about that, and we think, well, surely this would be what is best for me. And we've got to understand that no matter what may come, God is bringing in His wisdom what truly is best for me. James contrasts the wisdom that is from above and the wisdom that is from below. And the wisdom that is from below is incomplete. It's based upon a short-sighted knowledge of the surrounding world. Ask any scientist in any field, have we discovered everything there is to know about this field? And they'll all tell you, no, we're still learning, and we're still learning. We're still ever striving for knowledge. So we understand that the knowledge in this world is limited, and so our wisdom, which is based on that knowledge, has to also be limited. The wisdom of this world. We find out in James that it is also carnal, that it is enmity with God, and that there is a wisdom that comes from above. There's a wisdom that comes from above because He is the creator of all things. You ask God, what more is there to discover in oceanography? For God, the answer is nothing. God, what more do you need to know about astronomy? And the answer is nothing. God, what more do you need to know about geology? Nothing. You see, God knows all of those things. And as the creator and designer of the universe, He has a wisdom. And so as we rely upon God, that means that we are going to trust His wisdom, and we're going to trust His providence to take care of us in due season. The world may look and say, no, that's not the right timing, that's not the right way. But in Christ, we know that God's way is the right way. How am I using these seconds, these precious times, precious moments of life? May I suggest that we also show a deep respect for God. In fact, we are told in 1 Peter 1 and verse 17 that we are to conduct ourselves with fear throughout the time of your exile. It's interesting how Peter paints for us this picture that is reminiscent of the Old Testament Israel, and how for a time they were faithful to God, and yet then they were unfaithful. And then another time they were faithful again, and their faith was kind of an ebb and flow. There were high points and there were low points. And look who was writing this book but Peter, who himself had the start and the stop, the start and the stop, the high points and the low points. And he says that our life, while we're on this earth, we ought to conduct ourselves with fear throughout our time of exile. And our time of exile is our life on this earth. You think about it, our soul, our spirit is yearning to be with God, to draw closer to Him. And at the same time, we're held a little bit to this earth, but we know that our great desire, our great yearning is to be with God. And as long as I am separated from the presence of God, Peter says, I am in exile. I'm away from His presence. I'm just like the Israelites who have been separated from God, or separated from the land of Jerusalem, where God's presence was beholden in the temple in the city of Jerusalem. And so while I'm in exile, I must, he says, conduct myself with fear. Now think about that word fear, respect, reverence, or awe. Then we look at God and we recognize His ultimate power. And we don't just respect that, we fear that. We fear what God is able to do. In Matthew 10 and verse 28, He says, don't fear Him who's able to kill the body, but rather fear Him who is able to heal both the body and the soul in hell. There ought to be a healthy fear for God and His power. But not just that. Think about this. There needs to be a healthy fear of temptation in this world. Have you ever noticed sometimes people play with temptations? They get close to them, they dabble in them just a little bit and think that it's a light thing. Temptation is not light. Now, I know that when you're tempted, that is not sin. The sin is giving in to the temptation. But no sin comes without first that temptation. And so if we are saturating ourselves or surrounding ourselves with tempting situations, we are playing with fire. There's an old saying that says when you play with fire, you're going to get burned. When you play with temptation, you're going to get more than burned. You're going to have your soul decimated by the devil himself in his clutches and pulling you to the depths of hell. It's not just about a little burning, it's about an eternity of burning. And so there's a fear of the temptation. There ought to be a fear of evil. Sometimes we make light of the devil. We make light of evil itself, like it's not that big deal. I'm strong enough. I'm powerful enough. I can overcome it with no, I can't. It took God coming from heaven to earth to overcome the devil. And so in Him we trust, and we need to have a fear of evil, that there is evil in this world, and we need to be afraid of it. We need to stay away from it. We need to use God's power to overcome it in our lives. And we do need to be afraid of punishment. You look back at that relationship between God and Israel. How often God sent prophets and punished this nation. Murmuring in the wilderness, people died in plagues. Trusting in themselves, and people died. Over and over we see the lack of fear of God and of temptation and of evil, and the lack of fear for the punishment, and people do whatever they desire. Whatever seconds we have left ahead of us, may we use them to show respect for God. May we also use them to live our lives in righteousness before God. Paul will write in Ephesians chapter 5, he says, look carefully then how you walk, not as unwise, but as the wise, making the best use of time, because the days are evil. Therefore, do not follow, or do not be foolish, but but understand what the will of the Lord is. What is he telling us? He says, time is running out. The days are evil. Now there's some debate about what exactly Paul means when he says the days are evil. Does he mean that the days are evil and that the time is against us and it's marching against us? We always think, well, I've got a little more time. I'll do that next week. I'll do that next month. And we think, well, time is not going to run out, but the days are evil. Time is working against us. And certainly that fits in the context. Or does he mean that our days on this earth are surrounded and saturated by evil? And certainly we look around us and we see an immoral world. We understand that there is evil around us and these days are evil. Maybe Paul is a bit ambiguous here on purpose because both are an important lesson to us. Life is hard and time is working against us. And so let us make the best use of time right here and right now. Do not be foolish, but understand what the will of the Lord is. Know God's way for our lives. That's what it means to have righteous living. We can sum it up in two statements. Do what God says, avoid what God says, avoid. Do what God says. To him that knows to do good and does it not, to him it is sin. James chapter 4 and verse 17. Avoid that which God says to avoid. Avoid every appearance of evil. Stay away from it. Back away and live righteously before God. There's no greater use of your time than making the best of each moment and living righteously before God. Because one, obviously, you will be able to put yourself in the salvation of God. You can lead others. And in those moments that we have left, maybe that's the fourth point, reach out to others for God, or reach out on behalf of God. In Colossians 4 and verse 5, he says that we are to walk in wisdom toward those outsiders, making the best use of time. It's the same phrase he used in Ephesians 5 to make the best use of time, or some translations, redeem the time, for the days are evil. Redeeming the time, using each moment, milking each second for the glory of God. And what I love here is when I think about this, he says, in Ephesians it's about our inward righteousness, but in Colossians it's make the best use of your time toward those who are without. Because the days are evil for them too. Time is running out for them as well. And so we need to, toward those who are without, if we're going to make the best use of our time, we need to be urgent toward them, recognizing that we are swiftly coming to that time when the light will be gone and there will not be a chance to work for God. That's what Jesus tells us, to work while it is day, for the time comes when no man works, in John 4:35. Or in John 9. We need 9:4. In John 4 and verse 35, the fields are white in the harvest. If we wait too long, the grain will rot in the field if we don't go out and harvest when it's ripe. And the assurance is right now, the fruit, the grain is ready to harvest. In John 1 and verse 40, it's Andrew who goes with an urgency and gets his brother, Simon Peter, and tells him that we have found the Messiah. This is it. So we need to be urgent. We need to be instant, in season and out of season. That's what he tells us in 2 Timothy 4 and verse 1 and 2, is that we need to preach the word and be instant. That means that we are ready when it's time to go. Our shoes are already on and we're ready to go. Get a lot of people that will come visit me in the evenings. 9 o'clock at night, I'm still sitting there with my tie on, cinched up to my neck and my slacks, and they say, "You must really like those clothes." No, I don't know when someone's not going to call me at 9 o'clock and say, "Mom's in the hospital." I'm ready to go. But it's more than just ready to go visit someone here, visit someone there. It's ready to go because I'm ready to go home. We use the phrase sometimes, with his boots on. Live life with his boots, ready to go at the drop of a hat. Be instant. Be ready to go.
whenever the time for the preaching of the gospel, and I'm not just talking about from the pulpit. Brethren, we all preach the gospel to our friends and to our neighbors, to our relatives, to our co-workers, to our schoolmates. We're constantly preaching the gospel with our lives, and then with our mouths we're telling them of the good news of God and warning each that the moments are swiftly flying away. Please come before it is too late. And I'm going to be not only urgent and instant, but I'm going to be selfless. Others save with fear, snatching them out of the fire, Jude 23. You know that's one of my favorite verses. Be selfless. We oftentimes are just concerned about our next meal, my next pair of shoes, or maybe my family. Sometimes our focus doesn't get much beyond our own kids or our own family. We need to be selfless, ready to reach out to those that we don't even know, or maybe some that we know only a little bit, with the gospel, reaching out on behalf of God. Make the best use of that time. Time is truly filled with swift transition. And as we turn each page of life, we know that the seconds are passing away. And while we are certainly amazed at each moment and how great and joyous things can happen in an instant, winning a football game, meeting a new friend. In those simple moments, we are astounded by how life can turn. And yet there is no turn of life more important than the turn we take in obeying the gospel. Yes, there's other great decisions in life, but obeying the gospel is the turning point. Have you used the moments of this life to come to Him? To be baptized for the remission of your sins? To be added by the Lord Himself to His church? Have you used that golden moment? Or maybe another question for us tonight. Most here are Christians, but maybe we're struggling. Maybe our faith is dimming over time. That happens. Life has got you down. Maybe you, like Job's wife, you've cursed God and said, let it go. But you realize that this moment, right now, is an opportunity for you to change. For you to fall back into the grace of God. To fall back into His love and be carried to heaven no matter what you've done. You're not too far from God's grasp. But you need to make your wishes known. And if tonight we can help you in restoring your faith and zeal, or we can help you, assist you in obeying the gospel, we want to. Won't you use this moment, this second, to respond to His invitation while we stand and while we sing?